Tap into the psychology of engagement and more. This is where we talk about life, learning, and everything in between. This is the Lifelong Podcast, a show for those of you who love to ask why. It's because we're marketers. It's because we're coaches. It's because we're change makers. Each week, we dive into the big questions and explore the psychology of engagement with strategies, tactics, and special guests along the way. Now, here's your guide, the visibility hacking queen herself, Coach Molle. Hey, visibility hackers, and welcome back to the Lifelong Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Molle from visibilityhacking.com, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you guys here with me. But of course, it's Thursday. I'm not alone. You know the deal. It's time to have a conversation with another super awesome, badass entrepreneur. And today we have my purple-haired sister from another mister, the one and only Jenn Neal. How are you today, Jen? Who are you and what are you doing?
Oh, I'm awesome. Thank you, Molly. Fantastic introduction. I love it. All right. Well, my name is Jenn Neal. My business is Formula Done, and I help driven entrepreneurs cut their customer acquisition costs and eliminate that frustration that comes from producing content and seeing it not actually resonate or land or produce. So that's what I'm all about.
I feel that in like the deepest parts of my soul. So a lot of us go on that journey where we're told to produce, just put out the content, and everyone has like a different kind of strategy and blah, 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 blah. But we try them, and our stuff just doesn't get the eyeballs on it. Like, what should we be doing?
Right. Oh, such a great question. I love this because this goes back to the core of how I even decided to shift my entire business. It was a conversation that I had with a blogging specialist friend of mine. She's a massive blogger, and she totally put this into perspective for me. So her name's Holly Homer. And she said, does Facebook think you're spam? And I'm like, no, but here's the deal. If you are like, oh, I'm just going to talk about content, I know I'm going to talk about this thing that happened today, or I have this story I want to tell, or I just want to talk about this part of my business because we're like, oh, I should do something with that, right? If it isn't resonating and there aren't hooks that are drawing people in right away, then what happens is they're consistently scrolling past, right? If they're scrolling past, the way the Facebook algorithm works, if you think about this, it's like, oh, spam is when people aren't engaging. And so the more people are just flipping past your stuff and not engaging, then the more Facebook thinks that you're spam. And so they deregulate you on the algorithm, and it's this loop cycle, right? So I really dug in to say, where does it start? What are the things that make you stand out? And a lot of it, what you are doing, Miss Coach Molle, with visibility hacking, you got to stand out, right? That's eye-catching. You have to do that to start with. But really, what it comes down to as well is connecting with people on an emotional level by telling engaging, I believe, personal stories with that. And then secondly, the topics that you're talking about, just because they're your ideas, your information, or maybe even your jargon, whatever, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily what people are looking for. Yeah. So if you spend a little bit of time in the beginning saying, here's things that people need in this situation, then you tie that, you would basically ask the Google or other places, when people need answers to this solution, what are they actually searching for? And a lot of times the things that people are searching for and the things that we're talking about are not the same in terms of the actual words. So it's part of if you start with your market research beforehand and say, here's what people are looking for, this is what they need the answers, then that's going to resonate. And then you start going back up the algorithm ladder. Makes sense.
So that's when we're typing into the Googles and into the YouTubes, the how to ...
Yes.
digital marketing, make money online, become a millionaire overnight, make money in your sleep, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
When really we're selling coaching programs and we're selling visibility hacking. We're using completely different verbiage from what we're looking for, or what our people are looking for, and what we're actually putting in our messaging. So how do we do both of those at the same time when we're actually producing the content?
This is my favorite part. Okay, so here's what I love this, and I'm still kind of trying to name it, but I'm sort of calling it the traffic strategy, because we have, if you think of, this really comes down to a lot of avatar work, which I know we're like, oh, no more avatar work, but like it totally has to happen. So if you think about your customer, but not only your customer as a whole, but like, what is your entire customer journey that you're taking them through? And at the point where they're cold and warm and hot, their needs and their desires and their pain points are all different at the different stages. So depending on where this information is being used, typically social media, typically going to be very cold traffic, unless you're going like in a hot group or something like that. But if you think about that, like really focus on what are the pain points, desires, and needs that they have at that point, not to get from step A to Z, but to get from step A to B, just to move them along. So really, like if you could shift thinking about what it is that can help them at the stage that they're at for the media platform. And then you use the attraction bridge method, which is, I love this. So if you think about like, oh, I want to talk about visibility hacking. Okay. So why is that important? So we start like peeling back the layers. Why is this important? Well, because people need to be seen so that their message can resonate, so that they can help more people, right? So if you keep peeling those layers back until you get to a place where, and I'm sure you've done all this work with visibility hacking, you can get it to a core emotion or like a core foundational principle of your business. And oftentimes there's more than one, you know? Like for example, I did this exercise with a friend of mine who's a chef. And she's like, one of the things that I always love to talk about is like why you need sharp knives. And I'm like, okay, so why do you need sharp knives? And she's like, well, it's more safe. It actually helps you be more efficient so you can save more time. So we kind of ended up going down that route. And it's like, well, why do you need to save time? And why do you need to be safe? Well, because I want to spend more time with my family, because I want to be present instead of meal prepping, you know, for my kids. Like, I want to be a better mom. And I'm like, there it is. Like, I want to be a better mom. How does that even relate back to sharp knives? Well, you tell a story about it. Mm-hmm. You know, like, God, I missed my kids' last soccer game because I knew that I had to get food ready. It was a Sunday afternoon game or something, you know, and I was at home food prepping and I shouldn't have been. And it kills me that I missed that game. And, you know, and then you bridge across and you're like, that's the same pain that I want to help you stay away from. And that's why I really talk about like sharp knives, which makes sense. So you bridge them across with the story. That was a lot.
Storytelling is the place to be. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, so when you're producing content, when you figured out what your people are looking for, you know, your avatar, so you know how to speak to them in their language and help them get from, as you say, point A to point B, and then from point B to point C, so that eventually you get them all the way to that tangible result, that end goal, that Z, that next step in the value ladder or whatever. So how do you change your messaging as your customer changes? Do you segment your list? How do you actually accomplish that changing of message?
Such a great question. So I am a total visual person. I love to map out everything. So I map out the customer journey, like we talked about with the traffic, hot, warm, cold, or cold, warm, hot. I said that backwards. But But you also look at like your value ladder, and you look at every single lead magnet that you have, like every single place, your Facebook group, wherever anybody can enter into your world. And we want to make sure that there is a path to help move them from wherever they are. Yes, I segment my list as much as I can. But I also know that like a cold buyer, that's somebody I've never heard of at all. Like that's the easiest one. They're coming in cold. I can segment them right away. But as soon as they come in and they opt into something and maybe they buy like a low dollar product, like they went through the warm and hot stages to get to that low dollar product. Now they're a warm audience for my next product.
Yeah.
So once you kind of, let's see, their stages will continually change, but so do not only like warm traffic and hot traffic is going to be on your list.
Yeah.
You're going to have more access to them. Yeah. So that also means that the format of the message can change. So if you start paying attention to like, once they're in my world and I have their information, I know that I can talk to them with terms that they should be more familiar with, right? It's a lot different than the cold traffic. Or like, I know if they're coming in from a webinar and they're existing customers, then maybe, I can talk a little bit more high level. Like I can do a special webinar for my customers versus the cold VSL that I'm going to do for people who aren't aware. Yeah. So you really, it matters where they're at in the journey, but also the type of media.
Oh, always dropping the golden nuggets. Brilliant, brilliant. Well, Jenn, before we leave, any other last comments, questions, concerns, or knock jokes for our audience?
I will say avoid this number one mistake that I see is when you're first starting to map all this out, you're like, oh, I have to do this, like all the things. No, just have one thing. Like you can literally do all of this with just a phone or email and what you need, just start with something and don't get overwhelmed. That's all.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Jenn, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. But for those of you who think Jenn is super cool, because like I totally do, you can check her out on another podcast of mine. All the links are down below. Just saying. All right, guys. Thank you
so much, Molly.
And thank you guys at home for listening. I will see you again in our next episode. Until then, remember, I love you and be excellent to each other.